Hey loves, and welcome back to the channel. If you're new, welcome. And in today's video we're going to recreate the layering dress from Houseofcb, and these are the description of the dress on the website, so you can pause and read through it carefully. So this is the front details, this is how the front looks like, and these are also the back details. So without any further ado, let's get right into today's video. So to begin, I'll find the apex point and then draw my center line to the apex point. And then from there, I'll start to mark my bust radius, which is the measurement from the apex point to my underbar. So mine is 3¼ So I'll mark that all round and then trace those marks to form a circle. And that will be my bust circle. So from there, I would only contour the waist dart, so 1/2 inch on both sides, and then connect the lines like I am doing. From there, what I would do is to go down 2½ inches and then go in 1/2 inch on the side seam. Draw a line and then I'll cut that extra out. So I'll then mark my side seam allowance. I already added allowance on my pattern, so if you don't have allowance, you don't have to mark it. You can add your allowance later on. So what I'm going to do now is to shape the cap of the bust. This time I'm not doing any contouring because I'm going to gather the excess into the gathered thing, and also the inner lining will be the same. That is why I'm not contouring it. So I would continue shaping the cap. So I'm really looking closely at the dress while shaping the cap. This will enable me to get the correct shape of the cap. So I'm doing necessary corrections needed, and once I'm satisfied with that, I would go over the lines to make it a bit deeper so you can also see. So yeah, once I'm satisfied, I'm going to cut the upper part out which is not needed, and also separate the cap from the lower side of the top, and then cut out the dart from the lower side, and then put in my marking, my grain line, side, front, and center front. So for the cap, I'm going to use the slash and spread method, but first I'll measure the length of the upper part, and I'll be taking about 1½ inches from that length, because you remember we always contour, but this time we didn't do it. So from there I will put in my slash lines and then slash through them. And then what I'm going to do is to get a longer paper and then put in a line in the center that will indicate the bust line. So I would then paste the slash papers like that, and about 1 inch in between each paper. So once that is done, I would trace the shape I have now and then put in my grain line, and also use it as an arrow to indicate which side goes up. So once that is done, I'll add my 1/2 inch allowance all around, and this is how the cap looks like. And then this is the lower side of the top, so that I'll indicate also and put in how much we need to cut. So for the center front, cut 2, for the side front, cut 4, and then for the caps, cut 4. Next, we'll move into the back of the top. This I have done several times on my channel. So first you make a straight line in the old dot and then mark the center, and then you create a new dot and then half an inch from the side seam as we did for the front. And then I'll mark my side seam allowance. Like I said, I already added it on my pattern, so if you don't have it, you don't need to mark that. And then I marked also my back depth and then my zip extension. So I'll fold in my dot and then correct the back depth line and also add allowance. From there, I would cut out the upper part which is not needed and put in my grain line. You can decide to cut the dot out and add seam allowance to those parts, but it would be the same thing, so I do maintain the dot and then cut through it later. So these are the pattern pieces we would need for the upper part of the dress. So I would add allowance to the places needed on the lower side of the front later, and I'll be using this pattern from the previous dress I made. So yeah, they all have the same skirt or panels. So this is the fabric I'm going to use. It is 100% viscose floral fabric. I really like the texture. It feels really nice and smooth, and it's really flimsy though, but it's going to give me the nice drapey effect. So now that we know the fabric we're going to use, I would lay my skirt panel and cut 5 of these. And then for the center back, it would be cut a bit different. If you wore the Alicia dress, you would know how to cut that already. So what I would do for the center back is to fold the skirt panel in half and then mark 1 inch for the zip extension and then cut it out. So once I'm done cutting the skirt pieces, I'll move on to the top pieces, and you can see I added allowance to the lower side of the top which needed allowance. So you can see the number of pieces I have to cut, and once that is done, I'll go ahead and pin the skirt parts. So first I'll pin the center back where the zip extension is, and then I would continue pinning the other 2 panels to both sides of the center back. And then once that is done, also for the front piece, I would take the remaining 3 panels and pin them together right sides facing. So now I have the 3 panels, so I'll pin them side by side. And once that is done, I'll move on to my sewing machine and stitch all the seams. When the seams are all done, I would also finish every single part. And once that is done, I'll open the seams and iron them flat so that they look nice and professional on the right side. So when I'm done ironing them, what I'm going to do now is to join the 2 pieces together. So right sides facing, I have to connect the front piece to the back piece. So I'll put them together and stitch the side seam. So first I will align them and pin them together to make sure everything is okay before I'll go ahead and stitch. So once that is done, I would set aside the skirt piece and move on to the top pieces. I'll take off all my patterns and then I'll fuse in the very soft interfacing because the fabric is a bit flimsy. So once that is done, I will start with the back pieces. I will start with stitching all the dots. So first I will mark them out to make sure it's nice and perfect. So I'll go ahead to the machine and stitch that, and once that is done, I will slash through the dots and then trim it a little bit so they're all equal. So I'll do that to all 4 pieces, and then iron the seam flat. I will open up the seam and iron it flat. So once that is done, I'll set the back pieces aside and I'll move on to the front pieces. So I'll pin the side back to the center front on both sides, and then I'll repeat the same process on the other front piece as well. And once that is done, I would go to my sewing machine and stitch all of them. So now that it has been stitched, I'll iron the seams flat. I'll open them and iron. And this is how it looks. You can see that it looks really nice. And what I'm going to do now is to attach the back piece to the front piece at the side seam, and you can see that I have a long piece now. So as I always say, I don't like big seams, so I trimmed down my side seam, and then now I moved on to the skirt piece again. I would unpick it to where I want my zip to be. And then I'm also unpicking because this will enable me to attach my top piece to the waistline. So I'll take one of the top pieces and then align the waist, the side seams, so side by side, and then from there I'll begin to pin the whole waist. And once that is done, I'll go and stitch the seam. So with the other piece of the front, I would insert my boning, and I'm using the sew on bone, so I'll use my zigzag stitch to attach it to the top. So this is how it looks after stitching it. This is how the front part looks like, or the right side looks like. And now that this has been done, I'll move on to the cap pieces. So first I would remove my pattern, and then I would mark the arrow, and you can see that on the pattern I have marked the side and the center front. So I'll mark that on the fabric so that I don't turn the pieces upside down, or I don't put the side to the center front. So yeah, remember to put in that because the upper and the lower side looks the same. Also the side and the center front looks the same. So what I'll do now is to put in the gather stitch on the upper part of the caps. I will pull in the gathers once the stitch has been done, and then once that has been done, I make sure that the gathers part measures 8.5 inches long. So when I have that right, what I have to do next is to face the cap. So I would take a piece which is corresponding, center front facing center front and side facing the side, and then I will stitch it. So I repeat that on the other two pieces. Make sure it measures 8.5 inches, and then I will face it with the other cap. So always remember center front to center front and side to side. That is why you have to mark it on the fabric so you remember. So I stitched it and did an under stitch on the lining piece of the cap. So what I'm going to do now is to put the lower side together and run a gather stitch, and then pull in the stitches to form the gathers. So you can see that our cap is already forming. And this is how they both look like. So now I'll set them aside and then take my dress and then attach the zipper. So this is how it looks after the zipper has been fixed. So what I'm going to do now is to take the top piece with the boning and attach it to the other top without the boning. So side seam to side seam, and then I would pin the remaining part. I have to open the zipper like that and then pin it. So if everything is right, you would see that they would align perfectly without any excess. And when everything has been pinned nicely, I'll move on to my sewing machine and then stitch everything from center back, and then the center front and center back again without stitching the area where the cap would be. And I also did a understitch on the lining piece, which is the piece with the boning. So what I'm going to do now is to grab the cap pieces, and then I'll be inserting them into the space meant for them. So I'll make sure the center front area is matching the center front on the top piece. If you understand, the center front of the cap has to be pinned to the center front of the top. Yeah, so and the side to the side of the top. So that is why you have to mark it so that you don't mix things up. So once you get that, go ahead and pin everything. And then I would repeat the same process on the other side and then stitch it. So once that has been stitched, I would trim down the seam allowance and then flip it over to the right side. So I will use a sharp pointed tool to push out the corners to make them sharp and nice. And once that is done, what I'm going to do now is to face the zipper, or how do you say it, finish the zipper, that's the right word. So I'll flip the top onto the zipper like that. I've done this several times in my previous videos, and then pin them and then repeat it on the other side as well. And make sure you sew until you leave about 1/2 inch allowance. And once that has been stitched, I will trim the corners so that once I flip it over to the right side, it will look sharp and nice. So this is how the zip should look once it has been finished. So now what I'm going to do now is to turn in the 1/2 inch allowance to finish the waistline area. So I'll turn it in and pin it and make sure the corresponding seams are aligning. And once that is done, I'm going to use the stitch in a ditch method. So I'll turn it to the right side and stitch in the seam that I have already made. So this is how it looks once it has been stitched. And yeah, the dress is almost done. And what is left to do now is the sleeves and the frills that runs through the neckline. So for the sleeve, I did cut these 2 pieces, and the length is 21 and the width is 10 inches. So I'll fold it in half and stitch it like that. So I will do that and I will get back So once that is done, I would flip it inside out and then make sure the seam is in the middle part, and then I would iron it. So this is how it looks after I have ironed it. And what I'm going to do now is to attach a elastic band on both sides of the sleeve piece. So this is how it looks like. The elastic band was a bit shorter, so I would add a little bit more. So this is the frill part. So what I'm going to do is to also stitch the frill part like that. So the length of the frill is 4 inches. I mean, the width of the fabric for that is 4 inches, and I did cut as long as I would need, so just cut it very long. And once that has been stitched, I'll flip it inside out. And then press it, also with the seam in the middle. So this is how it should be looking, with the seam in the middle. And then I would run a gather stitch in the middle, so you'd see like this, and then I would gather it until the end. And then once that is done, I just pinned it along the neckline from the back and to the other side of the back. So from the center back to the other side of the center back. So I just pinned it. So now I'm going to stitch in the middle, from the center back to the other center back. So once that is done, this is how it should look. So this is how it looks also at the back. It really looks nice. I really love this dress. So from here, what I'm going to do is to work on the slit. So from the waistline, I would go down 12 inches and then mark it, and then from there I will start to unpick the seam from the hemline to open up the slit over there. So I'll unpick until the 12 inches point, and then I'll use my hemming adhesive to seal that seam over there. So once that is done, I would serge the hemline and then stitch it. So yeah, once that is done, now I have to make the frill on the sleeve. So what I'm basically going to do is to take one piece each for each end, and then just pull it as I sew. So by the time I finish sewing, the elastic band will kind of gather the frill. So this is how it looks once it has been done, and I did finish it with a zigzag stitch basically. So what I'm going to do now is to just hand stitch it to the side seam of the top like that. I will pin it and hand stitch it. So yeah, so basically this is the end of the tutorial, and I hope you did understand it. If there is something you did understand, you can ask me in the comment section.